Well, hello, ladies. Welcome to another study on Genesis. I got a little excited there because I actually heard it this time, the recording in progress. I haven't been hearing it, so it's been a little bit annoying not hearing. So if somebody connects and wants to speak out loud, I'm pretty sure I'll hear you this time. So, yes, having said that, let's begin our beautiful chapter. I was tempted, not going to lie, I was tempted to do two chapters today because this one links beautifully with nine. However, I was like, you know what? No, because I would have to kind of like rush through it to get to the point, and I don't want to do that. I was like, no, but I don't want to do that. I'd rather take my time, even though you may feel like, I mean, it's chapter 8. We know what happens, like the flood, and then there's no more water, and then they come out, and that's it. No, but there are little details here that is very important to go through, and take our time to break apart, literally. Like, like good bread when freshly out of the oven, you like to like break it apart and like savor every piece. That's what I feel like doing with every chapter of Genesis because it's truly fresh bread.
Yeah.
Like that fresh bread smell from the oven. I just made bread earlier. That's why I can think of it. But yes, it's like, it's funny. Speaking of bread, every single time I bake bread, my little one, she always wants to nibble on it. She's like, "Ooh, I want fresh bread." Just, like, and I'm like, "It's still hot." And she's like, "It's so good right now." And that's kind of like how I see the word. We can't wait for it. Not that the word will ever get cold. Let me make sure you guys don't misinterpret my words. That's not what I'm trying to say. It's not that it will ever get cold, but we cannot get cold. We're the ones that have to make sure we're savoring it when it's fresh in our lives, right? And so that we can savor it better. Because the word, obviously, it's alive and it will never stop tasting good. However, if you are ratchet, like it will be boring to you. It'll taste kind of stale to you. Does that make sense? So that's kind of like what I came to my mind. But anyhow, having said all that, let's go ahead and read the chapter. Ooh, what am I doing here? That's last week's slide. But anyway, let's go ahead and read the entirety of chapter 8. And if Jessica, if you could read it, thank you.
Okay. Then the Most High remembered Noah and every living thing and all the animals that were with him in the ark. And the Most High made a wind to pass over the earth, and the waters subsided. The fountains of the deep and the windows of heaven were also stopped, and the rain from heaven was restrained. And the waters receded continually from the earth. At the end of the 150 days, the water decreased. Then the ark rested in the seventh month, the 17th day of the month, on the mountains of Ararat. And the waters decreased continually until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the first day of the month, the tops of the mountains were seen. So it came to pass at the end of the 40 days that Noah opened the window of the ark which he had made. Then he sent out a raven, which kept going to and fro until the waters had dried up from the earth. He also sent out from himself a dove to see if the waters had receded from the face of the ground. But the dove found no resting place for the sole of her feet, and she returned into the ark to him. For the waters were on the face of the whole earth. So he put on his hand and took her and drew her into the ark to himself. And he waited yet another 7 days, and again he sent the dove out from the ark. Then the dove came to him in the evening, and behold, a freshly plucked olive leaf was in her mouth. And Noah knew that the waters had receded from the earth. So he waited yet another 7 days and sent out the dove, which did not return again to him any more. And it came to pass in the 601st year, in the first month, in the first day of the month, that the waters were dried up from the earth, and Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked, and indeed the surface of the ground was dry. And the second month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth was dried. Then the Most High spoke to Noah, saying, Go out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons' wives with you. Bring out with you every living thing of all flesh that is with you, birds and cattle, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, so that they may abound on the earth and be fruitful and multiply on the earth. So Noah went out, and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him. every animal, every creeping thing, every bird, and whatever creeps on the earth according to their families went out of the ark. Then Noah built an altar to the Most High and took every clean animal and every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And the Most High smelled a soothing aroma. Then the Adon said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground for man's sake, although the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth, nor will I again destroy every living thing as I have done. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, winter and summer, and day and night shall not cease.
I mean, okay. So today I'm gonna try to do this a little bit different. I had a little bit of extra time. Hopefully none of my coworkers are watching this. But I had a little bit of extra time at work. So I was trying to get a little bit more creative with how I present the chapter in terms of kind of like, because before what I would do is read the connecting precepts and then do summarize it back with the slides. But I feel like I wanted to kind of multitask at the same time, like simultaneously go through the slides and jump back and see what I'm connecting it with. So we're gonna start with the introduction, and then you're gonna see that I'm gonna break it down by slide by the verses that I'm mainly gonna focus on with connecting precepts. I hope that makes more sense. And I kind of feel like that's gonna make more sense for me and for those listening later on, or even you guys that are here now and connected now. All right, so Genesis 8, it's about remembrance, it's about rest and the reestabilization of creation. How is that so? We're going to see it. We see that we come from judgment to divine restraint. Genesis 1 through 7, which we have studied thus far, we see this pattern. We have creation, then order, we have humanity, meaning mankind, and the corruption of humanity, right? We have the Most High and judgment. Now we see a shift taking place in chapter 8. So the Most High chooses restraint over destruction. Creation is stabilized despite human evil or man's evil, because we know that there is evil in the heart because of the corrupt seed being mixed and entangled in. And even if I just want to make a little parenthesis, because a lot of people think, oh, just because they are the righteous seed, there's no corruption. No, 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 no. I want you guys to understand that yes, there's still righteous seed in their genetic composition. However, because of the tainted seed that took place, there's already how do I say this? Manipulation of thoughts. There's already, because we see in this chapter that we just read that there's been evil placed from the beginning in man's heart. So I don't believe that evil just came because we were created at the image of Messiah, right? And the Father. So that sinful nature did not come from there, but more so from the desire to be, to become, which comes from Hasatan himself, from Satan, right? Remember, what was the thing that happened with him? He wanted to be like the Adon, right? He desired to be like him, a creator like him. And so that same pride and that same aspiration that he has, he then places it on mankind, both spiritually, I feel, and physically. Obviously, once it corrupts the seeds, it's even worse because there is already a DNA mixture there. But I feel like spiritually, he could still taint those that are righteous, right? By just think about it this way: Satan is also spirit, right? Because a lot of people think, oh, like if I am with the Holy Spirit, I will not think like him. However, yes, the Ruach, his spirit gives us the grace to overcome. Does that make sense? However, Satan can still come and tempt us the same exact way he tempted Messiah. And so that's what I want to make sure you guys understand here with this shift on chapter 8, that we see that despite of human evil, mankind's evil, we see the Most High creates a stabilized creation, basically, instead of just wiping out everything he created. So we're going to go back to verse 1. And actually, let me just do this. We're going to be jumping back and forth, so just we can read it. So the Most High, verse 1 says, Then the Most High remembered Noah. That word here, remembered, is what we're going to be focusing on right now. So he remembers Noah and every living thing and all the animals that were with him in the ark. And the Most High made a wind to pass over the earth, and the water subsided. But we see what starts the chapter is the remembrance, right? He remembers Noah. So let's go back to the slide. And it says here, the Most High moves to restore, not forget. What does that mean? The biblical meaning of remembered in Hebrew is zakar. And every time I look into the Hebrew words, I think of Alina, because Alina always throws in the Hebrew connections. But zakar, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but what it means is not mental recall. It's more of a covenant action toward deliverance. So, in other words, when you see the word remembered, he's not thinking, oh, I forgot. Yeah, I created Noah. He was handsome. No, he's not just remembering him altogether like as a person. He's remembering the covenant that he established with Noah, a promise that he made him. Because he obeyed, you obey, I will protect you. Basically. So that's what that remember word means. And we're going to see throughout scriptures that the Most High not only remembers, meaning Zakar, Noah, he remembers Jacob, he remembers Isaac, he remembers Abraham, etc., right? He remembers Hannah.
I was gonna say I was reading from Samuel too, so
Yes,
I
he
see that he
remembers.
remembered Hannah.
Yes, her prayers, right? And her devotion unto him. So I do want to like interpret that in the context of what it means before we do the connections, because that is very important to understand that when he says remember Noah, it's more than just like, oh,
Yeah.
his face came to mind,
Yeah.
right? So connecting with that, we have, speaking of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and all of our amazing forefathers, Genesis 19:29. And it came to pass when the Most High destroyed the cities of the plain that the Most High remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had dwelt. Exodus 2:24. So the Most High heard their groaning. This is speaking of Israel, the people of Israel, right? And the Most High remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's funny. I always like using that in my prayers when it comes to salvation of my loved ones, salvation of my family members, any person that comes to mind. I always tell him, Abba, remember Zakar, remember the covenant that you made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and have mercy on our people, right? And so, because we see throughout scriptures that that's something that he would do, he would remember, right? First Samuel 1:19, and speaking of Hannah, um, yes, then they rose early. I'm like, wait, did I have the right one here? Yes, we did. Then they rose early in the morning and worshipped before the Adon, and returned and came to their house of at Ramah. And Elkanah knew Hannah, his wife, and the Adon remembered her. So we see once again what Jessica was saying as well. The Most High remembers Hannah. So we see it's not just men, also women, right? Giving Hannah as an example. Psalms 105, verse 42. For he remembered his holy promise and Abraham, his servant. So every time he remembers, it's about covenant. Psalms 106, verse 4. And this is now a prayer. Remember me, O Adon, with the favor you have toward your people. Oh, visit me with your salvation. So, in other words, this is kind of like the same prayer that I gave you the example. Remember the covenant that you made with Abraham, right? Remember that covenant. Remember me, right? Exodus 14:21. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Adon caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and made the sea into dry land, and the waters were divided. Um, Actually, I think that was for the next verse. No, just kidding. That is part of this. Because this is also him remembering that he did promise Moses that he was gonna deliver the people out of captivity, right? Exodus 15:10. You blew with your wind, or actually more so connecting with the fact that this part over here, and the Adon made a wind to pass over the earth, and the waters subsided. That Exodus is actually more connecting with that, with the waters dividing, basically showing his control, not only control, obviously control, but his dominion over the seas, over the waters. Exodus 15:10, you blew your wind, the sea covered them, they sank like lead in the mighty waters. Again, confirming that what I just said. Job 12:15, he withholds the waters, they dry up. He sends them out, they overwhelm the earth. Psalms 29:10. The Adon sat enthroned at the flood, and the Adon sits as a king forever. So this is a psalm, right? A prophetic psalm, but look how it recounts that he sat enthroned at the flood. That kind of reminds me of how Messiah walked on waters. He has complete dominion over the waters. Isaiah 44:27. Who says to the deep, be dry, and I will dry up your rivers? Whew. Nahum 1:4. He rebukes the sea and makes it dry, and dries up all the rivers. Bashan and Carmel wither, and the flower of Lebanon wilts. All right, so now we're going to connect verse 2. So the fountains of the deep and the windows of heaven were also stopped, and the rain from heaven was restrained. I don't remember if I have something here in the slides, but let me just go and see really quickly. Actually, yes, let me read this where it says, the part of the waters, I'm going to go back to verse 1 where it says, and the Adon made the wind to pass over the earth, and the waters subsided. We see the wind over the waters, meaning a new creation language. So we see, and we spoke about this a little bit last week, but literally we see his ruach, his spirit, which is like breath, like wind, right? Passes over the earth. And this is a creation echo because like we spoke about it last week in Genesis 1, 2, we see that his ruach was it was over the face of the waters, right? Was hovering. This is the word I was looking for. It was hovering over the face of the waters. And in Genesis 8:1, then we see the wind over the flood, which wind is also a representation of his ruach, his spirit, which is breath. Think about it. So we see then a flood reversal. We see the controlled recreation of with the cleansing now of the waters being moved by the mighty wind. I don't know. I kind of feel like that's his like holy wrath through his ruach, right? Like I don't know. I don't know. So I put the images always like, Pinterest has been on point. Every time I Google, I mean, not Google, search. But yeah, like I was mentioning before, it makes me think of how Messiah walked on water and think of the account when he walked on water. It wasn't a calm sea. As a matter of fact, the reason why Peter doubted was because there was a storm. It's not so much that he was walking on waters, but if we go back to the gospel portion, it literally says there was a storm, which is why they got freaked out when they saw Messiah walking in the midst of the ocean because it looked like a ghost. I can only imagine lightning and thunder and wind, and then there's this big lightning. I mean, not lightning, but lit person. Literally, he's lit, because he clocks it. But anyhow, yeah, that's what I think about Messiah. He is, and that's honestly why I think he did that on purpose, walking on waters to literally show them who he is from the beginning. He has control over the waters. So yes, here's now back to 2. We just read verse 2. So we see it's about the closing of the chaos gates. Last week we spoke about the floodgates of heaven opening. Now he's closing. So it's a reversal of last week where we read in Genesis 7:11. So the fountains of the deep now shut instead of opening, right? And the windows of heaven are closed, which I showed you an image last week. Remember, and on the firmament, there's little windows, which is that I believe, and it makes the most sense that that's how the flood came in. It wasn't just a thunderstorm. It was literally the windows were open and the waters that reside above of the firmament came rushing in with his mighty wind, with his ruach, right? So the chaos is not autonomous. The Most High opens and closes disorder. In other words, he has complete control of what he does. The flood was not an accident of nature, but a controlled unmaking, now deliberately halted by himself. All right, so now we're gonna make some connections with verse 2. So we have Genesis 7:11, like we just read. Like you just saw on the slide that I quoted it. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, the 17th day of the month, on that day, all the fountains of the great deep were broken up and the windows of heaven were opened. So that's a contrast, right? Deuteronomy 11:17, lest the Adon's anger be aroused against you, and he shut up the heavens so that there be no rain, and the land yield no produce, and you perish quickly from the good land which the Adon is giving you. And this is obviously when he's giving, through Moses, telling the people to keep the commandments. In other words, and how they are tied in with blessings and curses, like meaning the observance of them, blessings, and the lack of observing curses. However, I like this language, this metaphor that he uses, because it's, even though it's like a metaphor he's using here, he's being literal as well. And he shut up the heavens so that there be no rain. And this has to do with both physical rain and also spiritual rain. Genesis 7:4 and verse 12. For after 7 more days I will cause it to rain on the earth 40 days and 40 nights, and I will destroy from the face of the earth all living things that I have made. Verse 12. And the rain was on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. In other words, he has complete control of what he does with creation. If he can cause it to rain, and he can cause it to stop whenever he feels like it. Job 38:37. Who can number the clouds by wisdom? Or who can pour out the bottles of heaven? And we know that 38, I'm pretty sure, is when the Most High comes in. I always forget to check back, but towards the end of Job is when the Most High starts questioning Job. Like, tell me what you know about this. So Genesis 7:24, and the waters prevailed on the earth 150 days. That is actually connecting with verse 3. So let's go back to verse 3. And the waters receded continually from the earth, and at the end of the 150 days, the waters decreased. So that's just connecting that right there. And I do want to show this slide. So in verse 3, we see that the Most High returns the time, right? He puts time in place again. So in other words, he reintroduces it. So waters recede gradually, restoration unfolds through process. In contrast, we see creation was an instant command. You know, on day one, he said, let there be light, and there was light, et cetera, right? But we now see a restoration which takes patience and time. So we see that it took place in 150 days, right? So the Most High works within duration after judgment. And I believe he's still working like that today. And it's part of our purification, it's part of our process. And it's also because we are placed in a time constraint, in a joy of bubble, to call it that, here on earth, this joy of bubbles, right? In heaven, there's no time, in other words, but for us, it feels eternal. And I was actually speaking to one of you earlier, and you know how a lot of times I believe Abba is just looking at us like, because he sees everything. He sees the full picture, and for him, it's like nothing. It's like beginning, end. What's in the middle? What's that? That's non-existent, right? In his mind. But in our mind, we're so stuck on time. Like the clock is ticking, the clock is ticking. And we have to sometimes let go of that time constraint and trust him fully. Because trusting that he's in control is where the promises will be fulfilled, right? If not, we're gonna be stuck in this, which we are. We are in this world, and yes, there is. We go by a clock, right? We go to bed at a certain time. We wake up at a certain time. That's how it is. But understand that the Most High also works with duration after judgment, and patience is needed. Okay? Absolutely. Okay. So let's go back here. Now I'm going to go to verse 6. So it came to pass at the end of 40 days, and that Noah opened the window of the ark which he had made. So at the end of 40 days, he opens a window, but we know that it took way longer than that for him to come out, right? So again, patience. It took a lot more patience for the waters to recede. So just connecting with verse 6, is just to show, I mean, it's just to show you that there was a window in the ark. Just put it for fun. Genesis 6:16, you shall make a window for the ark, and you shall finish it to a cubit from above, and set the door of the ark in its side. You shall make it with lower, second, and third decks. That kind of reminds me of a cruise. Deck four, deck five. Anyway. But yes, he gave specific instructions, and we see that, that Noah opened the window of the ark, which he had made. So yes, he had made a window because the Most High commanded. So now moving to verse 16. I know we're going to skip a few verses because I'm going to focus only on the ones that I see. Hi, Marvin. I don't understand what you're saying with salvation. If you could like type it again. But anyway, okay, you put it.
The cruise ship.
Oh, the cruise ship. Okay, okay,
Oh,
I see, I
really?
see. He's talking about a cruise ship.
Oh.
Yes. All right, so verse 16. So go out of the ark, you and your wife, and your sons' wives with you. Okay. So actually, no, no, no. Before I go to 16, I forgot I have verse 11. Sorry, sorry. I do have something very important to go through 11 here. This is really, really, really important, actually. So then the dove came to him in the evening, and behold, a freshly plucked olive leaf. So you know for sure I need to pause it here because there's a lot here, okay? So we see the dove again comes with a freshly plucked olive leaf was in her mouth, and no one knew that the waters had receded from the earth, right? This is a we had read before after 40 days he had checked, then he kept sending out the raven and she would go back and forth with nothing. And then it is not until verse 11 that she comes back with an olive leaf. So let's break that down. Before I go to my slides, I do want to read that from the Targum's translation. So in the Targums, check out what it says. It says, and the dove came to him at the evening time, and behold, a leaf of olive gathered, broken off, she brought in her mouth, and which she had taken from the mount of the Messiah. So that is a very interesting connection there that the Targum adds, right? And Noah understood that the waters had lightened from being on the earth. All right, so let's reread that again. It says, and which she had taken from the mount of the Messiah, meaning the dove took the olive branch or the olive leaf from the mount of the Messiah. That's what it says there, right? So I am going to go to my slides because there is a few connections here. All right. So the olive leaf and the promise of restoration. So what is, before we go into the promise, what is, in case y'all don't know by now, we're going to go through it. The biblical meaning of the olive. We know that it is a symbol of life restored after judgment. We'll see it in the Bible verses now. We see that it's a tree that survives devastation and regrows quickly, and that it represents peace, endurance, and divine favor. But besides all of that, because that's just like the stuff from the olive tree, right? But what are the biblical connections with the olive tree? I didn't put it here because it is we've been studying Genesis and we've been putting so much emphasis on the tree of life that was placed in the midst of the garden, remember? Which we were supposed to eat the fruit from that tree, right? However, Genesis does not say it was an olive tree, but when you read the entire Bible in context, it leads to show you, it's gonna show, it makes connection to Messiah is the olive tree, meaning the tree of life is maybe in a symbolic way, an olive tree. Again, a symbol of life, again, restored after judgment, a tree that survives devastation and regrows quickly. Who died and rose in 3 days? I mean, come on. A tree that represents peace, endurance, and divine favor. The olive trees are known to endure like forever, basically. They're strong, they grow beautiful, their branches are what you know it. But besides all of that, connections in the Bible, which we're going to read one by one now. We have Psalms 52:8. I am like an I am like a green olive tree in the house of the Most High. This is David comparing himself with an olive tree, meaning a tree of righteousness, right? Jeremiah 11:16. Israel, we see here that Israel is called a flourishing olive tree. As a matter of fact, you know what? Let's go back and read it. Let's just read them. So we already read Psalms 52:8. But Jeremiah, the Adon called your name. This is speaking to Israel, his people, green olive tree, lovely and of good fruit. Remember who else said, by their fruits you shall know them? Messiah. And
Olives are fruit.
yes, they are, yeah.
Yeah.
And good fruit. With the noise of a great tumult, he has kindled fire on it, and its branches are broken. We see Zechariah 4:3 and 11 through 14. Two olive trees are by it, one at the right of the bowl and the other at its left. Remember the image I showed you with the two olive trees and the menorah in the middle? Like, okay, I'll show it to you again later. Then I answered and said to him, what are these two olive trees at the right of the lampstand and at its left? The lampstand is a menorah, by the way. And I further answered and said to him, what are these two olive branches that drip into the receptacles of the two gold pipes from which the golden oil drains? Then he answered me and said, do you not know that what these are? And I said, no, my Adon. So he said, these are the two anointed ones who stand beside the Adon of the whole earth. And this is talking about his two witnesses, which his two witnesses signifies the Torah and the prophets, as well as the two houses that represents Israel, right? So Romans 11, and this is speaking of the cultivated olive tree. This is a one that I always go back to. If you've never heard it before, well, you're going to hear it again and again and again. This is Paul speaking now, connecting his new believers to a cultivated olive tree. So, and if some of the branches were broken off, meaning the branches from the olive tree, right? And you, being a wild olive tree, were grafted in among them, and with them became a partaker of the root and the fatness of the olive tree. So there's a distinction between the regular olive tree and wild olive tree, meaning one that was not the same kind, right? It says then, verse 18, do not boast against the branches. But if you do boast, remember that you do not support the root, but the root supports you. You will say then, branches were broken off that I might be grafted in. Well said. Because of unbelief, they were broken off, and you stand by faith. Do not be haughty, but fear. But if the Adon did not spare the natural branches, he may not spare you either. Therefore, consider the goodness and the severity of the Adon. On those who fell, severity, but toward you, goodness, if you continue in his goodness. Otherwise, you will also be cut off. And they also, if they do not continue in unbelief, will be grafted in. For the Most High is able to graft them in again. For if you were cut off, no, for if you were caught out of the olive tree, which is wild by nature, and were grafted contrary to nature into a cultivated olive tree, how much more will these, who are natural branches, be grafted in to their own olive tree? Okay, so if you've never read this before, you might be saying, what a tongue twister here is Paul saying? And I always like to show a picture, and I forgot to add it to my slides, but it's a picture of, so follow me in this if you've never seen it. It's a picture of a regular olive tree, right? And then next to it, a wild olive tree. So picture a regular olive tree, green, green foliage, right? And the wild one with like orangey foliage. I don't know. Let's make it, yeah, whatever, orange. So the green olive tree is the natural branches, meaning the ones that were supposed to be by covenant his people, Israel. Notice that what Paul is saying here is that when you come through Messiah by faith, the wild branches, meaning the orange ones, are grafted in into the olive tree because we know the olive tree is a representation of the tree of life. Think about it this way. Being grafted in, you partake of its root, you partake of its fat and its goodness, right? And so, what it's saying here is that those that did not believe in Messiah and deny him are caught off, meaning they're no longer green, they're broken off and they just get thrown off from the tree. And so, the cultivated olive tree is composed by believing branches and meaning believing natural branches, sorry, and believing wild or not original branches, right? They were not original. They were not born under the covenant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? They were born under the nations, like not covenant, but they were of the nations, and now they're grafted into Messiah. Why am I saying all of this? Because all this ties back. I know I want to take my time to break this down to you because there's a lot here. If Messiah is the olive tree, right? And this is something that keeps coming up. When you think of Israel, you think of a nation, you think of a country. And it's so far away from that. Israel is a people in covenant, meaning that it's a partaker of the tree of life. It says very clearly here that if you were a natural branch, but you do not believe, you're cut off. Now, it gives a warning to those that are grafted in that don't be haughty. In other words, don't be prideful, saying, oh, I'm better than them either. You can't say you're better than them because if they believe if you who were a wild olive tree were grafted in, how much more if they believe and repent, they get regrafted back into the tree. You get me? So this is not about a bloodline or about who's who and who's what. No, this is whether you believe and you keep his commandments and you abide by his truth. You are Israel point blank. Does that make sense? You are part of the tree of life. And why am I sharing all this? Because it goes back to the olive leaf that the dove brings back. Okay? It all ties back to that. Hosea 14:6. His branches shall spread. His beauty shall be like an olive tree, and his fragrance like Lebanon. This is speaking about Messiah. So, in case you still have doubt who's the olive tree and who's Israel, hello. It's clear as day here. Yes, Jessica.
It's reminding me of a verse I've been like meditating a lot lately. John 5:25. I am the vine, we're the branches. He's the tree, like like we're the branches of the tree.
And I love that you bring that up because I was actually trying my best to put it in the slide, like us, but it was not giving with my aesthetically pleasing thing. But anyway, so I was just thinking of mentioning it. But thank you for bringing it up because literally, when Messiah says in John 15, "I am the vine and ye are the branches," he's not talking about how that he's grapes. He's talking about, I am the vine from an olive tree. He's speaking, he's taking it back. A lot of people think of grapes because he says vine. But remember, a lot of the idioms have lost its true meaning with translation, loss of translation. The vine is literally a branch from the olive tree. It makes the most sense. He's not going to call himself grapes. Like, as a matter of fact, grapes, I don't know if you did a study with me that when I did the study, was it with the eighth day or Shavuot? I did a comparison with wheat, grapes, and the different harvests within scriptures. And I spoke about grapes, how grapes does not represent the good people, right? So he would not represent himself as literally grapes. It's funny because olives look like little grapes on a tree. So that's the vine he's referring to. And I believe in Enoch it says it more specifically. Exodus 30:22 through 25. Yes. Moreover, the Adon spoke to Moses, saying, also take for yourself quality spices, 500 shekels of liquid myrrh, have as much sweet smelling cinnamon, 250 shekels, 250 shekels of sweet smelling cane, 500 shekels of cassia, according to the shekel of the sanctuary, and a hin of olive oil. And you shall make from these a holy anointing oil, an anointment compounded according to the art of the perfumer. It shall be a holy anointing oil. So this is speaking about an anointing oil that was to cleanse all the things from the tabernacle, to anoint literally all the things of the tabernacle. And notice how the olive oil was the base oil. We also see, I didn't put it, but we also see that when it came to the menorah, the way that it would remain lit was by bringing the oil from pressed olives, right? We see in 1 Samuel 16:13, then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers. And the spirit of the Adon came upon David from that day forward. So Samuel arose and went to Ramah. So here it doesn't specify that it's olive oil, but I am pretty certain it was. Isaiah 61:1, the spirit of the Adon is upon me because the Adon has anointed me to preach good tidings to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives and the opening of the prison who those who are bound. And I'm speaking here because this is a prophecy about Messiah that Messiah later quotes himself to say that he is the Messiah, right? He is anointed with the oil because he is the literal olive tree. Zechariah 14:4, and in that day his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, which faces Jerusalem on the east, and the Mount of Olives shall be split in two from east to west, making a very large valley. Half of the mountain shall move toward the north, and half of it toward the south. That's our end time prophecy there. Now, I want to go back now that we've read all the Bible verses so that we can connect and do a summary of all of these. Okay.
That's the mountain, like the bird maybe. Like it said, like the mountain of Messiah. I wonder if it is like the Mount of
I wouldn't be
Olives, the same as
surprised.
like
I wouldn't be surprised
olive
because
tree.
everything in the word connects beautifully. Like, so once again, Jeremiah 11:16, Israel is called a flourishing olive tree. Zechariah 4:3, 11 through 14, we see that olive trees supply oil to the lampstand, meaning to the menorah. In Romans 11:17 through 24, we see the olive trees are as the Most High's covenant people, meaning Israel is his bride, right? Hosea 14:6, Israel's beauty compared to the olive tree. Now, the oil and the anointing. Olive oil equals anointing, consecration, and the spirit, his ruach, right? In Exodus 30:22 to 25, we see the holy anointing oil that we just read. In 1 Samuel, we see that David anointed with this oil. And in Isaiah 61:1, the anointed one is literally our Mashiach. And so when we read from the Targums, which we already read it, we see that expands the verse to say the olive leaf comes from the Mount of Olives. So links the olive branch to future redemption. Mount of Olives later becomes associated with the Messiah, as we just read. So the dove does not return with fruit. This is just some insight that I want to point out, but with a leaf. Okay. So in other words, this is connecting a promise before fullness, right? Life before restoration is complete. And what's the message? The overall message is this: before covenant is spoken, the Most High gives a sign of peace. Before the world is healed, the Most High signals hope through the olive branch. And we know that also in scriptures, Messiah is called the olive branch. So this echoes beautifully with what we find in the New Testament. Messiah teaches, prays, and weeps on the Mount of Olives. I don't know if y'all know this, but when he begged, when he pleaded, when he prayed, take this cup away from me. Nevertheless, your will be done, not mine. He was being pressed. Guys, he was being pressed. It literally says that in the Targums, yes, that it was that mountain, yes. Literally pressed like an olive tree that he is to remove the anointing oil that he is himself. Crazy, huh? So it is a place of suffering before restoration. Noah receives an olive leaf, peace after judgment, right? Israel receives an olive identity, which we read it in Romans 11. Covenant people, right? Do you guys see it now, the full picture? So Messiah stands on the Mount of Olives, which is the final restoration, because we know, by the way, the mountain that he ascended from, guess which one it was? Mount of Olives, signaling the final restoration as well, because he said that the same way you see me go up, the same way you see me come back, right? I'm paraphrasing, but in other words, that's what he says. So redemption begins with a leave, but ends with a king, the King of Kings, nonetheless, like the olive tree branches over here.
Can I
Yes, go ahead, go ahead, go ahead,
question?
go ahead.
Because
No.
I'm thinking about like also like her like Yaz had posted on her story today about like the wise and the unwise virgins. And I'm thinking about how like we are the olive tree and like we have to be pressed to get the oil, like to be the light. Like
Yes,
as because we are like the menorah now.
a
And it's like we have
representation,
to be
absolutely.
pressed like the olives. Like it's like so crazy how it all like
And even how the wilderness, it's a time of our press for our pressing.
yeah.
Because when we're in the spiritual wilderness, obviously, like you're going through it, you're going through the desert, you are being
Yes.
pressed.
We are olive trees.
We are like David. No, but like David said, I am like an olive tree. Yes, because remember, we were created to his image. So like father, like son, like brothers and sisters, right? Like his creation that we are. We're
But no,
supposed
the
to
oil
be.
that comes from our pressing is the light. Like is we need for the
Yes.
light for the
Yes.
menorah. Like,
Oh
oh
my
my
gosh. Yes, I
goodness.
love it. I love
Wow.
it. I love it. Thank you for that connection. So moving from the olive connection, let's go to verse 17 now. So bring out with you every living thing of all flesh that is with you, birds and cattle, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, so that they may abound on the earth and be fruitful and multiply on the earth. So connecting with that, well, let me go to the slide first and then I'll go to the connecting precepts. So we see here a renewed blessing, meaning a new awareness takes place here on this verse that we just read, which echoes of creation blessing, right? The command to multiply echoes Genesis 1, 22 and 28, and Genesis 9, 1 through 7. So now let's read those. This is what is echoing here. So, and the Most High blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters and the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth. Verse 28. Then the Adon blessed them, and the Adon said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. And then we see this is what happened at the creation, right? Account, and then we see after the flood, chapter 9, verse 1, and verses 1 and 7. So the Adam blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. So same account, same exact story, right? And as for you, be fruitful and multiply, bring forth abundantly in the earth and multiply in it. So that's exactly what I'm showing here, that we see a command to multiply. And we see a critical difference, however. We see blessing given, knowing human corruption remains. So mercy without illusion. In other words, we're gonna see how he knows that at the end of the day, there's nothing he can do to eliminate all of, I guess, corruption from his creation. There's nothing. He can wipe out the whole entire earth with water, with fire, but there will always be corruption. The only one that can save us is his word instilled in our heart. And that's why we see that critical difference here, that the blessing has not to do with that, because we are gonna always be corrupt unless we are truly washed by the word, right? Which is why it leads into, well, let me do the connections first. So we have for verse 20, and that's where we're going to go now. Yeah. So verse 20, then Noah built an altar to the Adon and took of every clean animal and of every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar. So we see from the very beginning atonement taking place. And that's what I was connecting, which is why there will always have to be an atonement made, because corruption exists, period. And we see how even after the wiping of the Nephilim through the waters, we see how the wicked seed still made it through the line of Noah, through one of his sons, his wicked son, right? And so, but we see before that even takes place, Noah is already building up an altar and making atonement for the sins. Connecting with that, we have a few verses, but before we read the connections, let's read what it says in the Targums. The Targums verse 20 reads as following. And Noah builded the altar before the Adon, that altar which Adam had builded, which it's funny how it says builded. I'm gonna just say build because my grammar can't stand it. But anyway, yes. And which Adam had built in the time when he was cast forth from the Garden of Eden. Are you paying attention? I'm gonna start again because I got distracted with build it here. Okay, and Noah built the altar before the Adon. That altar, okay, which Adam had built in the time when he was cast forth from the Garden of Eden and had offered an oblation upon it. And upon it had Cain and Abel offered their oblations. But when the waters of the deluge descended, it was destroyed, and Noah rebuilt it. And he took of all clean cattle and of all clean fowl and sacrificed for upon that altar. And the Adon accepted his oblation with favor. Okay, why do I like to read from the Targums? Because it adds details. We see that it's not any altar. First of all, it's the same one that Adam had created when he was cast out, meaning expelled from Eden because of his sin. So we see atonement being made for his restoration. Do you understand that? And we see that Cain and Abel continue that same oblation. Obviously, we know the account on Cain and Abel that Abel did it righteously and and Cain did it like
And it could make
half-heartedly.
sense because
Huh?
in Genesis, without this like detail, like it says that they offered, but like it doesn't mention the altar, but obviously there would be an altar there. Like,
Exactly. It reads the following in the canon. Noah built an altar to the Adon and took of every clean animal. What is that if not an atonement, right? Of every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar. Burnt offerings is it's repeated over and over and over throughout Leviticus when the Levitical priesthood comes in. And it's interesting because a lot of people think these offerings were just a temporary thing during the Levitical priesthood, but we see that it was from the beginning because yes, they were still under the order of Melchizedek. However, Messiah had not atoned once and for all for mankind, which is why we see Adam from the beginning trying to atone for his sins and sacrificing with the clean animals. And then make a distinction. Look how it makes, once again, we spoke about this last week, but it makes a distinction. What kind of animals were brought in? Clean animals, right? Clean animals way before the food laws were even given, right?
yeah, the law was for the
Exactly. Exactly. So Noah's first act of worship is this. Genesis 8:20 describes he built an altar, kind of very similar like in the Levitical times, right? Offers clean animals. This confirms that sacrificial distinctions existed before Mosaic law. So before the law, we see Genesis 7:2 anticipates Abraham and Sinai. And worship replaces Eden as sacred meeting place. In other words, this altar marks the first meeting point between heaven and earth, which is why they were attempting to atone. They were banished out of heaven, meaning out of the heavenly realm, which was Eden. And now they're trying to atone, bringing back that presence, that sweet smelling aroma to bring back his presence. So, speaking of sweet savor, and before I even continue, let me just read some connecting verses here with 20. So Exodus 29:18 and 25. And you shall burn the whole ram on the altar. It is a burnt offering to the Adon. It is a sweet aroma, an offering made by fire to the Adon. You shall receive them back from their hands and burn them on the altar as a burnt offering, as a sweet aroma before the Adon. It is an offering made by fire to the Adon. And by the way, we see this not only in Exodus, we see it throughout Leviticus, specifically connected to the feast days. It was always important to do an offering made by fire, right? Genesis 7:2, like we just said, you shall take with you seven each of every clean animal, a male and his female, two each of animals that are unclean, a male and his female. And then once again, the unclean were not permitted for sacrifices, right? That was only to keep the ecosystem. Genesis 22, verse 2. Then he said, take now your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. And this is obviously speaking now of the of the sacrifice that the Most High required of Abraham with his son. But notice how it is the same verbiage that he's using with animal sacrifices because it was a foreshadowing of Messiah himself. Well, we'll get to that eventually when we get to Genesis 22 because that account of Isaac, woo! When you're bringing Dasher though, oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Yes. And lastly, connecting with 20, we have verse Exodus 10:25. But Moses said, "You must also give us sacrifices and burnt offerings, that they may sacrifice to the Adon, our Elohim." And this is when Moses was trying to bargain with Pharaoh to let his people go, let my people go, right? And he was telling them basically, like we not only have to, I mean, you don't only have to let us free, but you also have to provide us the sacrifices because we need to go and atone, right? We need to sacrifice for to the Most High. So now, verse 21, that's what I want to bring in now. So we see the offering, we see the atonement, but this part is basically the heart of the whole chapter, and you're going to see why. We're going to see the most connections with verse 21. And the Adon smelled a soothing aroma. Then the Adon said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground for man's sake. Although the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth, nor will I again destroy every living thing as I have done. Why do I pause here and I tell you this is the heart of the chapter? Because we see the atonement, we see the sacrifice that Noah did, right? Then we see the Adon smelled a soothing aroma, and look at the connection is and then the Adon said in his heart, the soothing aroma that he smelled is what caused him to say, I will never again curse the ground for man's sake. Although, nonetheless, nevertheless, get all the synonyms to understand what he's trying to say. Even though the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. In other words, it doesn't matter how many flaws, even if I destroy it, I will never do this again, even though you're evil and wicked. I will not destroy you. What caused him to say that was Noah's sacrifice. You were talking about being pressed, right? Well, a sacrifice made by fire today looks like being pressed spiritually, right? And so connecting with that, let me show you I want to show you first this and then all of the connections that I have. So the sweet savor, what does that mean? Because it says that it was soothing unto him, right? So an odor of rest, tranquility, it soothed him basically, right? It soothed him. I kind of think of a mom when she's soothing a baby, she's like shh, 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 shh. So something that soothes, right? So an odor of rest. So it's a repeated language that we see throughout Leviticus, we see throughout Amos, we see throughout Numbers. And the Most High discerns and responds. In other words, the odor has nothing to do with the actual smell. Because I remember hearing this in one study a long time ago, and the way it was said, kind of like, oh, the Most High loves how meat smells. And it kind of didn't sit right with me, because I was like, I don't think that's what it literally meant. But now I see deeper and I'm like, this is not about a literal smell of meat burning. It's literally how he responds to the action, right? So smell as discernment. Because notice how, once again, in verse 21, it says that let's take it back because I don't want to not say the same I say the wrong thing. So it says, and the Adon smelled a soothing aroma after his sacrifice, right? So in other words, smell as discernment, rare anthropomorphism. Sorry, I don't know how to really say that. Anthropomorphism. In other words, it's smell equals perception and approval. It's not really like what he's literally with his, huh?
No, no, I was agreeing. I was saying right.
Oh, okay, okay. Like it's not literally like something from the senses, from the nose, from the senses. It's literally perception, it's approval. I perceive that you are surrendering unto me and you want to do right by me. That's what smells as a fragrant aroma unto him. A surrendered heart, a heart that leaves it all behind, a heart that is willing, a heart that is not, stuck on the things of this life, on the things of this world. That's what it smells good to him, right? Isaiah 11:3. We're going to read it now. But in other words, Messiah delights in the fear of the Most High, which literally means smells. When it says delight, it smells, delight, right? It's not every day we see smell described with human like qualities, but it's a deliberate choice. Back in ancient Near East, smelling something was seen as a sign of knowing what's good or bad, not just a physical thing we can't do. So I wanted to add that in so that you guys understand when we read all the connections with smell that has nothing to do with what's it?
Physical sense.
Yes, with the senses. That's the word I was stuck in my. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
You really can't. Everything is spiritual. Absolutely. So, verse 21 then connects with all of these. So, get ready. Exodus 29, I'm going to try to read it really fast. Exodus 29:18-25. And you shall burn the whole ram on the altar. It is a burnt offering to the Adon. It is a sweet aroma, an offering made by fire to the Adon. Verse 25, you shall receive them back from their hands and burn them on the altar as a burnt offering, as a sweet aroma before the Adon. It is an offering made by fire. In other words, connection with offerings made by fire, burnt offerings, sweet aroma. You're going to see that connection over and over. Leviticus 1:9. But he shall wash its entrails and its legs with water, and the priest shall burn all on the altar as a burnt sacrifice, an offering made by fire, a sweet aroma. You see it there again. Leviticus 26:31. I will lay your cities waste and bring your sanctuaries to desolation, and I will not smell the fragrance of your sweet aroma. See the contrast there? The contrast there is when you don't, by the way, Leviticus 26 is basically talking about the blessing and the curse, the same as Deuteronomy 28. So, in other words, what he's telling you here is when you don't obey me, when you don't sacrifice for me to atone for your sins, he's telling you, I will lay your cities. This is part of the curses, right? Waste and bring your sanctuaries to desolation, and I will not smell the fragrance of your sweet aromas. In other words, whatever you sacrifice, I'm not smelling that because it does not come from a pure heart. In other words, what he's saying, I don't care how much you do or say or sing or pray, you are basically a Pharisee and I don't receive it. It's the same connection. Amos 5:21 says, I hate. And every time I read this, I feel the fear when the Most High says this. I hate, I despise your feast days, and I do not savor your sacred assemblies. This is the Most High speaking to his people Israel, whose heart was far away from him, yet they were still observing the feast days, yet they were still doing the sacred assemblies, right? But he's saying, I hate, I despise, bro. Oh, I can't. I can't. You imagine oh my gosh, I will break my heart to break his heart like that. To do something that you think you're doing okay, but he hates it because it's not coming with that sweet aroma. What is that sweet aroma? That surrendered heart of obedience. Noah was obedient, which is why when he atoned, when he sacrificed, he received it a sweet aroma and caused him to say, I will never do this to the earth, to my creation again. Do you understand? Oh my gosh, 1 Samuel 26:19. Now, therefore, please let my Lord, the king, hear the words of his servant. If the Adon has stirred up against me, let him accept an offering. But if it is the children of men, may they be cursed before the Adon, for they have driven me out this day from sharing the inheritance of the Adon, saying, go serve other gods. In other words, this is David speak. I think it was David, pretty sure, of when they go and serve other gods. In other words, like you're going to be cursed. There's nothing you could do with your sacrifices, right? Numbers 28:2, command the children of Israel and say to them, my offering, my food, my offerings made by fire, as a sweet aroma to me, you shall be careful to offer to me at their appointed time. And we know that the appointed time is talking about the Moedim, meaning the feast days, right? All the sacred assemblies. But what is he telling you? all of the offerings. In other words, it's about obedience. It's about obedience. Ecclesiastes 8:11. Because the sentence against an evil work is not executed speedily. Therefore, the heart of the sons of men is fully set in them to do evil. This is now connecting more with the part in verse 21 where it says, um although the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth, right? This is Ecclesiastes is connecting with that, as well as Isaiah 11:3. His delight is in the fear of the Adon, and he shall not judge by the sight of his eyes, nor decide by the hearing of his ears. Ezekiel 20:41. I will accept. Oh, well, this one connects back to the sweet aroma. I will accept you as a sweet aroma when I bring you out from the peoples and gather you out of the countries where you have been scattered. And I will be hallowed in you before the Gentiles. In other words, this is a prophecy when Israel is restored, the two houses, right? And he's saying that he will accept his people as a sweet aroma. That's a prophecy of restoration. 2 Corinthians 2:15. Check this out. This is now Paul. For we are to the Most High the fragrance of who? Of Mashiach. Among those who are being saved and among those who are perishing. In other words, Messiah, which became atonement for us, smells as a fragrant aroma unto him. And it says that if you are his, you smell like Messiah. In other words, you smell like olives. Ephesians 5:2. And walk in love as Messiah also has loved us and given himself for us, an offering and a sacrifice to the Most High for a sweet smelling aroma. And this is exactly why the part about the Most High enjoying the smell of burnt meat, of cooked meat, did not resonate with me because it had nothing to do with the meat being cooked. It was about the sacrifice. He was looking further than the senses. He was looking into the hearts of the people. Genesis 3:17. Then to Adam he said, because you have heeded the voice of your wife and have eaten from the tree of which I commanded you, saying, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground for your sake. In toil you shall eat of it and all the days of your life. This is speaking about, once again, the curse. Actually, I think I put this wrong here. Yeah. Yeah, I don't think I meant this here. I meant Genesis 9:11. Actually, I did mean this one here. Give me 1 second. This is connecting. Oh, with the curse. Yes, I will never curse the ground for man's sake. Sorry, sorry, sorry. I did totally mean that one. All right, let's continue with the connections. Genesis 6, 7, 13, and 17. So the Adon said, I will destroy men whom I created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, creeping thing and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. And the Most High said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. And behold, I will destroy them with the earth. And behold, I myself am bringing flood waters on the earth, etc., etc. We've already read that. But all of that is to go back and say, he promises then he'll never do that again. Isaiah 54:9. For this is like the waters of Noah to me. This is the Most High speaking through Isaiah, by the way. For as I have sworn that the waters of Noah would no longer cover the earth, so have I sworn that I would not be angry with you nor rebuke you. In other words, he will not stay angry forever, which ties back, Jess. Remember that conversation we had about him redeeming the entire creation at the end? Kind of resonates here because of the fact that he says, I will not be angry with you nor rebuke you. Meaning, in other words, there's another verse that also says, I will not be angry forever.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like after the purging, after the judgment, and after all of that, there will be, I believe, a second chance. Genesis 6:5. Then the Adon saw that the wickedness of men was great in the earth, and that the very intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. We saw that on chapter 6, as well as we repeated now in chapter 8. So, in other words, the intent of the thoughts of man's heart is evil. This is why later in Proverbs, I think it is, right? In Proverbs where it says the heart is deceitful, who can know it, right? It's in Proverbs, I'm pretty sure. I just can't remember exactly where in Proverbs. But in other words, this is why I always go back to you can't just go by what you feel in your heart. You know, like that. Oh, the people say like, but I feel in my heart that that's the person for me, or my heart tells me otherwise. No, guys, the heart is wicked and it's deceitful and it's evil from our youth. Don't go by your heart. It will not. It will not. Which is why we are to be born again for his ruach to then come and become part of our heart. Like literally, his ruach replaces our heart of stone for a heart of flesh so that his ruach can write his laws and print his Torah in our hearts and in our minds so that we can then obey him because our heart by itself is wicked. Genesis 11:6, and the Adon said, indeed, the people are one and they all have one language. This is prior to the fall of the Tower of Babel, right? And this is what they begin to do. Now, nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them. So, in other words, we see the wickedness that came about just from unity with mankind. Job, and again, this is what I was trying to explain from the beginning that yes, there were still the righteous seed. We see it, we're going to study that furthermore, how Seth's bloodline literally stayed righteous and clean and you know, without mixing. However, we do see um, an extension of that seed being corrupt by Nimrod and his little minions, which happen to have part of the other seed, right? Job 14:4. Who can bring a clean thing out of an unclean? No one. That's a good one. That's a good connection. Somebody's saying something in the chat. Let me see. Hi, Shekinah. Shekinah's saying, so then that makes me wonder, once we've repented and renewed our hearts and carry his Torah in them, what's no, that's when we are truly cleansed through Messiah. Yes. Yes, I'm going to say that again because I was kind of like chop reading. So then that makes me wonder, once we've repented and renewed our hearts and carry his Torah in them, that's when we are truly cleansed through Messiah. When his Torah is written in our hearts because it replaces the corrupt heart that we have since we are youth, like the word says. And even after that, it says, Paul says in the scriptures, watch your salvation with fear and trembling. Guard your salvation. In other words, you have to constantly be fighting to not get that removed from your heart because the same way it went to a heart of flesh, it could go quickly into a heart of stone. And I believe that that's Satan's strategy, biggest strategy. Well, one of his biggest strategy is to make our hearts hard again. And that's why I'm always saying it's beautiful because Yasmin was sharing something personal last week. And I love how Abba led her to see, you know, I'm not gonna expose her issues or whatever, but I'm using it as a testimony, how Abba led her to see that there was something in her heart that she needed to let go of because it was hardening her heart. And with that hardening, a lot of other things were coming together, which, you know, were distracting her from the bigger purpose, which is to stay righteous, right? To stay clean, to stay set apart. So make sure that you're always checking your heart. Check your hearts. Look inwardly. Because let me tell you, it sneaks up on you. Next thing you know, let me tell you, when you feel yourself disconnected, that you no longer even want to pray, or, because let's be honest, sometimes it's hard. The flesh takes over. Even if your heart is in the right place, sometimes you're just tired and all these things. So learn to differentiate, right? But when you literally feel like a huge disconnect that you just don't care, whoo, take a deep pause and refocus. Something's going on in your heart. And let me tell you, that's how Satan operates. Because the minute he gets your heart hardened, that's it. You're losing it. You're losing the string that's keeping you attached to the tree. All right, Psalms 51:5. Behold, I was brought forth in iniquity. This is David speaking. And in sin, my mother conceived me. In other words, we were conceived in sin from the beginning because it took place in Eden just like that. And by the way, it confirms our.
It's all going back to like chapter 2.
Yes, and I was going to say it confirms our theory with what took place in Eden. Why was David conceived? I mean, why was David
Oh,
conceived
yeah.
in sin? because that's the sin that took place from the. But anyway, Genesis 17:9. The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately. Oh, look, it was in Jeremiah. I had said Proverbs, but it was actually in Jeremiah, and I put it here. Jeremiah 17:9. The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? No one but him. Romans 1:21, because although they knew the Most High, they did not glorify him as the Most High, as the Adon, nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Oof, that one goes perfect. Romans 3:23, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of the Most High. All mankind is sin, it's full of sin. Ephesians 2:1 through 3. And you he made alive who were dead in trespasses and sins, in which you once walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, the spirit who now works in the sons of disobedience, among whom also we all once conducted ourselves in the lust of our flesh, fulfilling the desires of the flesh and of the mind. And we know the mind and the heart is one, it's connected. And were by nature children of wrath, just as the others. So, in other words, Paul there is explaining to you all, whether you are natural branch or wild olive branch, y'all were nothing. You were wretched sinners. All of us were, right? Sons of disobedience, with the works of disobedience. Genesis 9:11 through 15. This is going to be next week, but I want to do a preview before we wrap it up. Thus I establish my covenant with you. Never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood. Never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. And the Adon said, this is the sign of the covenant, which I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for perpetual generations. I set my rainbow in the cloud, and it shall be for the sign of the covenant between me and the earth. It shall be when I bring a cloud over the earth that the rainbow shall be seen in the cloud. And I will remember, that word remember again, zakar, right? My covenant which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh. The water shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. And this is one of the reasons why I don't fear hurricanes. Just say, I shall not be destroyed by no floods, or I may perish a little bit, like the material things and stuff, but whatever. All right, let's continue now with verse 22 to wrap it up. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, winter and summer, and day and night shall not cease. I want to read that same verse from the Targums and see how much more clarity it brings. Verse 22, right here. Until all the days of the earth, sowing in the season of Tishri, and harvest in the season of Nisan, and coldness in the season of Tabeth, and warmth in the season of Tammuz, and summer and winter, and days and nights shall not fail. So notice how the seasons are attached to months. These are the names of the months in Hebrew. And we know that Tishri is in the fall. Is it? Yes. No, wait. Tishri. Please, somebody quickly remind me. Where's Tishri?
I know spring. Yeah, it was spring.
Tishri.
Yeah.
Sowing is the season. I know that Nisan is spring, yes. And coldness of the season of Tebet. This is for sure like around December, January, around there.
It might be summer.
Warmth in the season of Tammuz, this is summer, yes. So Tishri would be kind of fall, I think.
Yeah, I think
It has to be fall.
because it says September and October. Yeah.
Yes. That's why Tishri is around the feast, the fall feast. That's why I was like, no, it can't be. All right. So notice how in other words, so I'm bringing in the Targums. This is because he's adding the seasons to specific months, connecting with the feast days too, Nisan, Tishri, right? And it has to do about a harvest. So why am I sharing that? Yes. Sorry, I just saw. Shekinah has shared something else. Okay, so let's go to wrap it up. So the human problem remains. I'm gonna go back because I forgot to read this. This is going back to Genesis 21 before we go into the seasons, okay? So the inclination of man's heart is evil from youth. So that goes with what you were saying, Shekinah, right now. So this echoes, we've read all of these already. In other words, flood did not change human nature. And the critical shift is this: human evil will lead to destruction. However, in Genesis 8, we see that human evil led to a divine restraint. So judgment will no longer be mankind's default response, in other words, right? Which is why he has not exterminated the whole earth, which is so wicked right now. So now going to what we were talking about, mankind's condition. Ecclesiastes reinforces Genesis 8:21 as a description of reality, not a theological problem to be solved. Humans were made upright, as we read in Ecclesiastes 7:29. Evil is persistent and often unpunished. Thus, like in Genesis 8, Ecclesiastes assumes our Creator's purposes continue despite, not because of human behavior. And that's where mercy comes in. So, now I'm going to summarize all this. Enoch and post-flood divine regret. In Enoch 55, which actually let's read it first before I do all of this. In Enoch 55, verse 1. I lost it. Where was? Oh, here. And after the head of the days repented and said, and after, sorry, that the head of the days repented and said, in vain have I destroyed all who dwell on the earth. So Enoch confirms exactly what we're reading here. And this is why I want to bring him in. Because Enoch 55:1 uniquely places divine regret after the flood. In vain have I destroyed all who dwell on the earth. This reframes Genesis 8:20 and 21 by combining divine grief, as we saw in Genesis 6, and divine restraint, as we saw in Genesis 8:21 and as we read in 9:11. So the result is an Elohim who realizes, not an Elohim who remembered all of a sudden. No, he came to a realization, not intellectually, but relationally, that judgment alone cannot heal creation. In other words, I believe the Most High realized Messiah himself is gonna have to come. Because if it's not through him, in other words, human nature is corrupt. If it's not, like, we can atone temporarily like the Levitical priesthood did, and obviously we know that Abraham and we know that Noah and Abel and Cain and all of the above did, but we know that it was only would cover temporarily. It would have to come from Messiah himself for us to be atoned eternally, because through his redemption is the only way that we could ever be saved and redeemed. And that's what I believe he came to the realization at the flood. Like, it don't matter how many times I wipe them down. They're evil. They're wicked. Plan B. Let's go for it. You know what I mean? All right. So now going back to the very last verse that we read, which is verse 22, and which also connects with the Enoch precept, the stabilization of time. The promise of enduring cycles mirrors Genesis 1. We see from light to dark, the creation of light and darkness, day and night, seasons and appointed times. They're all back in Genesis 1, going back, right, to the very beginning. So a parallel text with Psalms, which we're going to read it now, Psalm 74, Jeremiah 33, and Isaiah 54. So the order of the pairs is carefully chosen, mirroring the ancient biblical view that time is a divine design, not just a random occurrence, which is why I read from the Targums, so you could see how he attaches spring, fall, like fall, spring, summer, winter, whatever, with the actual months that he gave it, right? It wasn't at random. It was a divine design, which is why the feast days are allocated around those days, right? A big chance creation is now seen as stable. The Adon is now connected to the earth's natural rhythms. So we're stuck on this time frame. Let's just go to the Bible verses I just put there. Let's read them quickly. So we have Isaiah 54:9. For this is like the waters of Noah to me. For as I have sworn that the waters of Noah would no longer cover the earth, so have I sworn that I would not be angry with you nor rebuke you. Psalm 74:16 through 17. The day is yours, the night also is yours. You have prepared the light and the sun. You have set all the borders of the earth. You have made summer and winter. So I was just confirming that. And I always love when I see all the borders of the earth because we know that the border is what?
The ice.
The ice wall around the earth that does not allow for the water to fall out. The very clear depiction there of a biblical earth, right? Jeremiah 33:20 and 25. Thus says the Adon, if you can break my covenant with the day and my covenant with the night, so that there will not be day and night in their season. Thus says the Adon, if my covenant is not with day and night, and if I have not appointed the ordinances of heaven and earth. So we just see the connection there with the appointed times, his covenant, and the reason why he divides the seasons and he puts us in this time frame of divine order. So to sum it all up, Genesis 8 teaches that Abba's remembrance initiates restoration. Human nature remains unchanged and it will always be, right? Divine patience replaces divine destruction. Worship becomes the meeting place between heaven and earth, meaning when they would sacrifice, right? That's true worship, sacrifice. Worship is not just singing a pretty song and crying and having some boogers come out of your nose. Though that is very nice, it's not what true worship means. Point five, creation is sustained by covenant, not innocence. In other words, it's the covenant that he made as a result. It's not because we are so worthy of his, like not wiping us out, but he made a covenant and he abided by it. So the flood does not fix humanity. It reveals the Most High's decision to walk with humanity anyways. So Genesis 8 wraps up with the Most High's strong decision, and Genesis 9 puts it all in writing, which we're going to get into next week. So the stability promised here becomes covenantal law there. The question now shifts from will the Most High destroy again to how will mankind live under mercy? And that goes once again with what I was talking about Messiah. And you don't see it here in the image, but there's a ring, which I believe it has all to do with covenant. As long as you're in covenant, that's how we live under his mercy. So, having said all of that and shared all of that, I really pray that this brought clarity, but not just clarity, that it brought some fear to truly want to worship him in spirit and in truth. And to, like I told you, I think 21 was the heart of it all. How the Most High made a promise to never wipe out the earth again because of the surrendered heart and obedience of one person. Imagine how much more he would do with the surrendered heart of all of us at once. So, having said that, that's the only way I believe we can walk in his eternal mercy. Let's just walk in obedience. I mean, so thank you for breaking bread with us. And I'll see y'all next week. And any questions, as always, I am always saying, feel free to ask, to write to me. We're here to serve you. Much shalom to all of you. See ya.